One of the speakers, her dream job is to be a children's librarian. You can ask her about any book. She's up to 70 so far this year. Halfway through the year, 70 books. And the other speaker, who besides loving cooler bags, loves to travel, which I guess the cooler bag would be great because he's trying to visit all 50 states, and he has 6 to go. He's pretty close to the goal. So everyone, please welcome Molly and Andrew.
Andrew and I are super happy to be here. I'm Molly Huie. I'm the team lead for data, legal analytics, and business at Bloomberg Law. If you've been here for a couple years, I've spoken at the last couple of conferences, and Jared reached out and he said, hey, can you come this year? And I said, great, what would you like me to talk about? He said, data journalism. And I said, no, but Andrew can.
So yes, hi, I'm Andrew. I am a data reporter at Bloomberg Industry Group, so I work with reporters across our newsroom to tell stories with data. And it's great to be here, especially because I actually started R about 4 or 5 years ago, learning from Jared at a boot camp. He came to our company, and that was my introduction. And so I never would have thought I would be here 4 or 5 years later actually giving a talk. So this is very special.
Great.
So what are we going to talk about? We are going to give more of a high-level view about how to take some of the principles that we use with data journalism to guide the projects that you do. When you go from something like this, some XML, some hard-to-read data, to something like this, where it's a polished, finished presentation that tells a story in a very short, succinct way. So I'm going to give it over to the survey person to conduct a little survey.
Okay, how many of you have been drinking already today? No, you are not taking advantage of our speaker bartenders. Do more. Really. How many of you write about the data that you are working with? For a non-technical audience, okay. Half, 2/3, not bad. So we're going to take you through some of that process because in data journalism, we're not writing for a technical audience. We're not doing academic papers. We're not doing any kind of technical writing, really. So that code that Andrew showed on the last slide is the only code we're going to show you. You're welcome. Yes. So how do we interrogate data like a journalist?
Exactly. And not only how, but why. And so one of the first reasons that you want to bring some of these principles into the work that you do is because it gives you a layered understanding of the data that you're working with. So you want to be able to get really specific, nitty-gritty, talk about the technicals of how you did something, why you did something, but then also distill that down to a simpler form where you can talk to a broader audience about what you're doing. And so that goes to the next point, is that it makes your data approachable. You want to be able to have your data accessible to the widest variety of people. And finally, that also makes it easier to justify the work that you're doing. When you can distill something down to the simplest forms, you're able to really have a better understanding of how you did something and why you did it, and you can back up what you've been doing.
Like a journalist.
Like a journalist.
But before we're able to do that, we first have to get our data. So internal data, external data. My team works mostly with internal data. And because we're Bloomberg, that includes the Bloomberg terminal. It includes the universe of federal dockets filings. It includes a global patents database. But it also includes surveys, which my team does a lot of. So that's the internal data we work with. You mostly...
And then in the newsroom, we don't often have the benefit of being able to do our own data construction where we're actually putting together our own data. We're relying on data that's already been collected, already been produced by government agencies, NGOs, companies. And so we have to work with what we're given. And that comes with a few different challenges. So each has some pros and cons that we're going to talk about with the next step, which is vetting the data, which is, especially when you're dealing with this external data, so important. You have to understand exactly what it is that you're looking at. And so when it comes to vetting the data, what we usually do is make sure we understand the format that it's coming in. So this applies to a variety of different things, right? So with numbers, are we talking hundreds, thousands, millions, billions? Don't just assume whatever is on a spreadsheet is, the real number. Always be sure to put in that extra work to understand the format. If it's dates like we saw earlier for quarters, that might be shown in a specific way. So always understand the format that data is coming in and take some steps to actually get through that. And then also, you want to do some spot checks. You want to make sure if there's any outliers in the data, if there's stuff that's missing. Go through, do some quick summary statistics to see what it is that you're looking at holistically. And then that goes to the final point as well, make no assumptions. And Molly's got a reason why you don't want to make
Yes, so
assumptions.
even when we ask people to self-report their data, as in surveys, there are people that get it wrong. Years ago, my team used to run a yearly HR survey. We would ask HR directors everything about their practices, their department, and we'd have a series of numerical input boxes that say, what is your department's budget? What's your whole organization's budget? Because we'd run some ratios and, HR directors would see if they're getting more or less than the average. Every year, there were people that overshot their department budget by multiples of 10. It's like, your department budget is not 10 times the entire organization budget. Pretty sure. Yeah.
Yes, so
Yeah.
even with internal data, you got to do these spot checks, you got to vet it. Any kind of data, always be taking these steps. But now once we've gotten our data, we've vetted it, we understand generally what is happening with it, it's time to write about it. And this is some of the steps that you can take to make sure that you're writing about it clearly and not making any mistakes when you do that.
Right, because about 2/3 of you said you were writing about data, so you're probably already doing this. But given that it's a high-level presentation, this is what you can do. This is what you can take back if you're training somebody else to write on data.
Right, and so you want to make sure that you're rounding appropriately with the data. You want to describe things in real words. And if there's one thing to take away from this presentation, it's just about making things approachable and using real-world examples to try and take your data to the next level so people can actually understand what it is that you're doing. And so it's important to generalize a little bit sometimes with data, or you can say about a quarter or just over half. And we generally do better talking about rates versus percentages. So for example, it's better to say 1 in 5 New Yorkers versus about 20% of the New York population. It's easier to visualize one than it is the other. And then also another thing to keep in mind as well is just seasonality. If you're dealing especially with labor data or any time series data, to know if there are going to be fluctuations in the data that you're working with and if that's already accounted for, because you want to be sure that you're describing that correctly.
Yep.
And so this is just a real-world example that comes from our newsroom from one of our great reporters, Laura Mahoney, who did a story on a complicated issue of taxes, sales tax. And so this has to do with this quirk in California tax where for online sales, it comes from the sales tax, the local sales tax, goes to where the transaction occurred, not where the customer is located that's buying the product. And so because of this, cities have struck deals with companies where they will put their distribution centers in their city, and then the city will give some of the money back to the company as an incentive for doing that. And so this is one of the ways that we describe what's happening here. So Dinuba, this is a city in California, receives 1% of the sales price, which is the local share of the total sales tax. The city then shares its portion with Best Buy, 50%, and lawyer Robertson DeHaas, 10%. So none of that's wrong. That's all factually what is happening, but it's hard to wrap your head around that. So what we did, and you can see that this is actually the text that we use to support this graphic, to give that very nitty-gritty wording for what is actually going on. But then we talk about it in real terms that people can understand and wrap their heads around more easily. So we give the example where there's a consumer, they purchase a $100 item at Best Buy, they get charged $7.25 in sales tax, and then $6.25, that goes to the state and county, $1 of that sales tax goes to the city of Dinuba, Best Buy, 50 cents goes back to them, and then 10 cents goes to this lawyer who actually wrote this deal. That
He's getting really rich if
Yes.
he's getting 10 cents a transaction.
Yes.
Good on him.
And so that was like one of the major takeaways from the story as well, is that this lawyer was getting a lot of money from this deal that was struck.
And does this remind anybody of Jessica's talk where it's like you're crediting the first thing, the last, all these things go sideways? But at least this makes it really understandable because that's tough.
Exactly, yeah. So give real world examples when you can, and it helps people understand better.
Okay, so we've gathered our data, we've vetted our data, we've written about our data. Andrew just showed you a really good visualization, but really kind of the last step before you publish something is you're gonna visualize something, right? Because that's how our brains work. Visualizations allow us to take in a lot of information in a small space and a small time. So We have on my team a fabulous graphic designer that does most of our work, and his tagline is, "Don't be wrong, don't be confusing." So in the previous example, all the words written out, it wasn't wrong, but it was confusing. You couldn't do anything with it. And so then, that infographic helped with that a lot.
Exactly.
And then, again, use appropriate chart types, right? The infographic worked for that because you had to show so many things going around. But, I think at this point, we all know when to use pies, almost never, when to use bar charts, line charts, all those kinds of things, so.
Right. And then always be sure to include your source with the visualization. And this goes right into the next point, which is you want your visualizations to be able to stand alone. So like that last graphic that we showed, we were able to show it to you, and it was able to make sense because it had a headline, it had a description, it had a source, all the material was there. So make sure that your visualizations can tell a story on their own. They don't rely on stuff that's either in a report or in a story that's nearby to make sense of it.
One of the things we always say is if somebody does a save as or prints out just your visual, that should make sense by itself. The copy surrounding it should be the extra, the context, and that you shouldn't duplicate in both parts. If it's in your graphic, it doesn't need to be in your text. And if it's in your text, it probably doesn't need to be in your graphic unless it's kind of headline, top-level material.
Right, right.
And to illustrate our point, we present to you bad graphics. These ones are terrible. Please don't ever do this. Pies within donuts and pies that add to not 100%. And this violates wrong and confusing, I'm pretty sure, on a couple of levels.
Yeah, so don't
Please
do that.
don't. Just please don't. All right, so this is where I go all inside the actor studio and start asking Andrew, what is his wish list? So if I am a person that has a compendium of data that you would like to use as a journalist, what would you like me to do?
Yes, and so thankfully we're in a room with a lot of people that are producing data for people like me that actually analyze it. And many of you already do these things, but if you don't, please spread the word, help others to start taking these, start doing this as well. So the first thing is please have a data dictionary, detailed explanation of the data fields and what is going on so that I can actually fully understand what is happening and not make any of those assumptions or not have to pick up the phone and call you and go through a detailed explanation of how you collected something.
What else?
And then next is if I do have to contact you, maybe I still have questions, even if you do have that detailed data dictionary, have a clear point of contact for who is in charge of the data at your company or organization. And ideally, this won't just be a press person who doesn't understand what's happening with the data, but someone who actually put together what it is I'm looking at so that I can reach out to you. And I love to, whenever I'm dealing with external data, if I have a project idea in mind and a way I'm going to go about doing that project, to talk to whoever it is that created this data set to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing with your data. This is how I'm thinking of analyzing it. Does that make sense? And I've had times where people have come back and said, no, you can't really make that. You can't say that because it's not there in the data. It's not how we collected it or for whatever reason. And so that's extremely helpful to be able to have those conversations and to make sure, one, that you're aware that I'm using your data and that it's out there, and two, that I'm actually using it correctly.
Okay.
And the next is just being transparent about when the data was updated, and if it's still being updated, that's not always clear. And so it's great to have that just plain and next to the data.
Current as of.
Yes.
Done. Continued, because the wish list is longer.
Yes. And
There's
so
more. But wait, there's more.
This is a big one, and this has become big during the pandemic, especially we've seen with public health agencies where they have been locking data behind dashboards. And
Can I jump
yes,
in with a bad
please.
dashboard? Okay, so if any of you all care anything about law firm diversity, we're about to release a very big law firm diversity project on Monday. And as part of this, I was going through the submissions that we got from law firms. And I wanted to say how many of the firms that submitted data to us are part of the AmLaw 200, which is like the biggest, highest revenue firms in the country. Easy to find, locked in Tableau. It's great. I could scroll the Tableau. I had to go through all my submissions and like line by line by line, are they in this Tableau dashboard? It was a pain in the butt. Please let your data be downloadable.
Yes, so please. It makes it so much easier. And for some government agencies, they've been using this kind of as a runaround to say, you know, well, we're fulfilling our obligations under FOIA. We're giving you the information. It's right there. But you can't do anything with it. It's all locked behind it.
And it looks pretty, and it's really usable for the average consumer.
Yeah.
So there's the, okay, that's fine, but if there's a point of contact, we could reach out and say, hey, look, we'd actually like the data behind this, and that would make it easier. But was there a point of contact? Nope.
And then finally, and I don't think any of you do this in this room, but tidy up your data if it is not already. I hate spreadsheets that have 70+ columns, especially when you're analyzing stuff year over year, and some of those columns change, and then you have to rectify which columns change, which ones match up with which, and when you have a spreadsheet that is just so enormous, that makes it almost impossible. So yes, it's easier to have multiple spreadsheets with different fields that you can connect to each other than one with all these columns.
That are also referenced in the data dictionary.
Yes, yes.
Good, good, we're good. All right, so I think you all are basically ready to interrogate your data like a journalist, right? You're gonna gather it, you're gonna vet it, what are you gonna do? You write about it, visualize it, it's gonna be great. We are available for the rest of the day, so please come and talk to us.
Yes.
We like people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And